If you're not using Ironclad for contracts, you could be leaving millions on the table without knowing it. Every contract holds renewal dates, pricing terms, and obligations you can't afford to miss. But good luck finding them when it matters. Ironclad's AI instantly surfaces what matters so you can act before opportunities slip away. That's why they're trusted by OpenAI, L'Oreal, and Salesforce. Find the savings hiding in your contracts at ironcladapp.com/podcast. That's ironcladapp.com/podcast.
Hi, this is Joe from Vanta. In today's digital world, compliance regulations are changing constantly, and earning customer trust has never mattered more. Vanta helps companies get compliant fast and stay secure with the most advanced AI, automation, and continuous monitoring out there. So whether you're a startup going for your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or a growing enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta makes it quick, easy, and scalable. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. Get started at vanta.com.
Welcome to episode 228 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is John P Reynal, the president and CEO of the Women's Cup, one of the most ambitious global platforms in the women's football. John has spent his career building sports properties across continents, and in this conversation he makes a bold case. Women's football isn't a charity. It's one of the most undervalued growth opportunities in sports. We spoke about why over-investing early matters, how TV rights and valuations are lagging behind reality, why the next decade of women's football could reshape the entire sports industry, his unconventional journey to and through the sports industry, and much more. John, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. It's an honor to be talking to you today.
It's great to have you on the show. You are the president and CEO of the Women's Cup. So can you tell us a little bit about that and your role?
So the Women's Cup is a international women's professional club competition, which pins clubs from around the globe against each other in matchups that they would otherwise not have. It's in essence a bit of a women's club World Cup, where teams from Asia, Africa, South America, Europe, the United States, and beyond can meet in a competitive format against each other in four match tournaments, which eventually end up crowning a champion. So it's a project we started back in 2019. And we're due to launch in 2020, but because of COVID, got its first start in 21. And we first, played in Louisville, Kentucky, and the first tournament had the host Racing Louisville and Chicago Red Stars match up against PSG and Bayern Munich. So that's how it all got started.
That's fantastic. And we will talk a lot about the women's game. I heard another interview with you and you said, why don't we over-invest in women's football? So then obviously you see a huge potential. So just talking around that and why you also, started the Women's Cup. Why is women's football such a great investment?
So to get to that answer, or to answer your question, I would have to go back and tell you a little bit of our background in football in general. I started a company called Onsite Entertainment back in 2014, and we became the second largest match promoter in the United States behind Relevant in men's football. And we were involved in all the club competitions that got played in the U.S. with all the Latin American teams, Central American teams, national teams. We had the Argentina national team, Colombia, Honduras, Jamaica, Haiti. We did all their matches. So we were very heavily involved in men's football. In 2019, we started looking at the possibility of doing things in women's football. And I commissioned a consulting study to understand well the potential, the financial viability of women's football and what the market looked like. Remember, back in 2019, women's football is not what it is today, right? I mean, of course, it was already a gigantic movement, but there was only 8 teams in the NWSL. There was no USL Super League. CONCACAF did not have any women's events. And so the market here was a lot smaller than it is today, both here and in Europe. So we really had to understand as a men's football company what we were getting involved in. And after I commissioned the report, the sort of the analysis of the financial viability of entering this new segment, I realized, and we all realized in the company, that there was great opportunity. Great opportunity because the numbers were already very interesting in attendance in the United States, very interesting in TV viewership, and there was really a lot to do and a lot of room to grow. So we really decided that there was an opportunity, and when you utilize the phrase, or I utilize the phrase, overinvest, I really mean um, women's football is not a charity. Women's football is a business, and in any business, you need to overinvest at the beginning so you can see results down the road, which is what we did. Back starting in 2020.
So in what way did you overinvest with the Women's Cup?
Well, we did things that perhaps at the time were considered crazy. For example, we were the first to bring European teams to the United States to play in our tournament and fly them in business class. And when they arrived at port of entry, whether it be New York or Chicago, we sent them private jets to pick them up and chartered the clubs to Louisville. And got them to stay in five-star hotels, five-star training facilities, and have an experience that was exactly similar or identical to the experience we would have offered a national team from Argentina. So I still look back at the videos where we brought PSG and Bayern Munich in 2021, the first time they came to the U.S., the women's teams. And we literally had the Louisville airport shut down to receive the clubs as they arrived on the private jet, and we had the water cannons receive the plane as they would receive a president arriving. And I had the governor of Louisville and the mayor shut down a whole wing of the airport so we could do a press conference and receive the European players. And I can tell you, they had never seen anything like this. At the time, PSG and Bayern Munich were playing in front of maybe 500 people or 300 people back in Europe. And now they're arriving to the US and they're getting treated like the men's team, like PSG men's would have arrived with Mbappe, or Bayern Munich, with Harry Kane. So that kind of go all out, over the top, overinvest to develop a product and a brand is basically what we did.
That's very interesting. Did you see that there had to be a return on investment on that? Was it so they would have the same treatment as the men because that's how they would fly in? Or did you see that by giving them these opportunities, that would translate into them playing better, or they would have more comfort or something along those lines?
Well, we were trying to establish a brand, an IP, a product that was synonymous with quality, was synonymous with, you know what, we're going to go all out so that the product is good. I mean, one of the issues that I think was women's football was facing at the time, which has now mostly been resolved, is that, for example, the whole production around the event was of third grade. They were filming women's games with 2 cameras, 3 cameras, and the whole experience was deficient for not only the players but the fans. So we set out to say, okay, first of all, if we treat the players and the clubs first rate, they're going to want to come and play our tournament, right? They're going to react like this is for real, and they're going to play to win, which has always been the case with the Women's Cup. Now, we're an invitational preseason tournament, but I can guarantee you players and clubs come to the Women's Cup to win. And it's a huge, the prize for them as far as prestige to win the Women's Cup. So we wanted to generate that element of prestige. And then on the broadcast side of it, also, from the day one, I said, we have to film all the Women's Cup tournaments with 8 cameras and do a full production that you would see on any men's event. And that also gave the perception of quality, and we had CBS and Paramount Plus as our initial broadcast partners. So the games were broadcast in the US on major platforms. And so that whole movement, I think, is what gave the brand the quality it has today.
So was there any pushback or some barriers that you faced when you launched in 2019 that later was pushed to 2021?
Well, we had a lot of barriers. Yeah, we had to go up against. Well, go up against it be a strong term. We had to negotiate with the ongoing governing bodies for the possibility to play. Then we had to negotiate with the league so the clubs would be released to play, and we had to sort of carve out a niche in a spot or an area where we were not directly competing with anybody. Which is basically this preseason window, right? Where clubs are looking for competition. They need to tune, themselves for the upcoming season, and they want to travel. So it's the perfect time. And none of the governing bodies are going to provide that solution because they're qualification based organisms, and we're an invitational based event. So we could move within that range and establish this event, but that was not without a lot of wheeling and dealing to try to convince those folks that we were not coming to take anybody's space, but we were going to come to add value to women's football.
You went all in, you overinvested. How did you approach the media rights, production? We talked about like you had the 8 cameras instead of the 2, but media rights and getting more people to the stadiums, all of the other factors.
So media rights, we were very fortunate from the get-go to develop a relationship with CBS and Paramount+. And then we developed relationships around the world with other major broadcasters, DirecTV in Latin America. We had DAZN in Europe, Nippon TV in Asia, and Saudi Sports Channel in MENA, and W Sport in Africa. So we developed a very good network from the beginning for distribution. So we had a good product. There was interest in the product. We developed the distribution network, and that allowed us to really, push through to get the awareness.
Yeah. As you mentioned, you were the first one to bring also European teams into this tournament. And it's a little bit different because in the US, there are some independent women's teams, for example, Angel City FC, for an example, while in Europe, that's not usually the case. So how do you see this difference, and does that somehow impact the games or how these teams are structured?
So in the United States, both women's first division leagues, the NWSL and the USL Super League, are completely independent from men, right? So that's the only country in the world. Canada also, by the way, has the Northern Super League. So let's take USA and Canada as the only sort of countries in the world that have a scenario where women's teams are really just women's teams. The rest of the world, Latin America, Europe, Asia, etc., have clubs that have men's and women's divisions. Now, if the question is, how has that benefited the United States to have clubs that are only women oriented? Well, I think the United States is a mature women's football market where you have to think because of Title IX back in, a few decades ago, where, the U.S. Government forced all universities to have a women's team for every men's team, right? That generated that, women have been playing competitive football in the United States at the college level for many years now. So they have a head start. And that head start also translated into these women exclusive leagues that have existed for a while. I mean, the NWSL is a little bit over 10 years old, but there was other women's leagues before the NWSL. And in 1991, the United States won the Women's World Cup here in the US, and that was sort of like the start of a major movement. So there's a huge head start in the US. And the reason I'm saying this is that that Europe is catching up fast and Latin America will catch up. But, I think today that sort of format of women only clubs, and in some cases women only stadiums is the way to go. I mean, without a doubt, all the energy, all the attention, all the focus is vested on the women's team. And so, maybe sometimes in Europe you see that the women's teams are an afterthought of the men's team. And, reasonably, because maybe the men's team is doing 100x on revenues over the women. So, the clubs understand the value of growing women's football, but the reality is they're making a lot more money on the men's side. But if you just have a women's only structure, you're going to put all your focus and attention on that. It's going to be better.
That's a really interesting point. And it sounds crazy to me when you say that US is more mature on the football side, because you, as a European, you feel like we have played football forever and soccer has
become now to the US. But as you said, like on the women's only side, it is more mature. And I feel like in Europe, as you said, it's kind of an afterthought, and people feel like that you need to have a men's team that supports the organization, otherwise it will not work.
Exactly. Exactly. And look, I think it's a matter, you just said something super important, which is what happens to men's football in the US, right? It's the same thing that happens to women's football in Europe, right? So one of them got a head start, have a lot more time to develop the market, and is more mature. And so today in the US, you have, for many years now, Portland drawing 20,000 people to the stands. You have Washington doing the similar numbers. You have Bay doing similar numbers. You have Kansas City, selling out a 14,000 seat stadium. And so that speaks of a mature product. Whereas in Europe, with the exception of England, and obviously with the exception of, Champions League finals and, women's Euro finals, which are major events, the rest of the regular season of the local leagues is played in front of 1,000 people, 2,000 people, or less. And so, that's going to take some time to get Europe to the level of awareness. And I think it's going to benefit European clubs to be independent of the men's club, so they can really go out and market their product in a way that is different from the men. And one of the things we've realized, and we can discuss later on in the podcast, is that we've realized that we need to market women's football in Europe and Latin America and other emerging markets in a different way that we do it in the United States.
Definitely. And my thought around this was also that if you have Angel City FC, there are some investors on that club that have invested a lot of money, some famous actresses and so forth. In Sweden, for example, we have the 51% rule, as it's called. So the members need to own 51%, which means that you have less opportunity for investment. Maybe that could also be a little bit more difficult then versus in the US.
Well, the U.S. Clubs are franchises, right? They're not clubs. The difference between the U.S. and the rest of the world is that when you have a franchise, you have an entity that one person or an investor group purchases with the sole purpose of sporting results, right? The whole club concept of having the fans vote on anything is merely symbolic, right? You're not, the fans here do not, they're fans of the club, but they're not, members, right? Like they are in Europe and the rest of the world. So that franchise concept allows, owners to really take a business approach behind all of this and do things that maybe you wouldn't be allowed to do in Europe or elsewhere.
Exactly. So that was my thinking, that if you said that if you put 100% focus on something, that will get better. That's why a women-only club will do better in that sense.
100%.
So maybe that's not possible in Europe the same way, because we have these 51% rules and they are not franchises, they are clubs.
Not everywhere.
Not everywhere. In those places, what can be done to go over that bump?
In the places where the fans are, are involved, and you have the 51% rule, I think you need to really basically separate the clubs and run them independently within the same umbrella. But you need to say, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm a man and I'm involved in the women's football industry, so I can tell you this from the perspective of a man speaking about this, which is, you know what? You need to have women, involved in the infrastructure of commercializing and marketing and selling women's football. They're much more prepared to reach that audience. That doesn't mean that, you want to have the top people involved and you want to have smart people that study the market, promoting. But at the end of the day, you need to have infrastructures of people that understand the product and market they're selling to. And what I see mostly in Europe is that most clubs have a male-driven infrastructure that caters, when I say market infrastructure, I mean commercial infrastructure, right? Marketing, sales, partnerships, and those men that are driving those infrastructures are obviously prioritizing the men's team, because that's where the real money is. And then they give some thought to the women's team and obviously, that's not usually enough. So if you were able to divide those structures and say, okay, you know what, we are a major club in Europe. We have major finances. We have a lot of money to deploy, and we believe in women's football as a growth market. We're going to separate the clubs. We're going to run the women's team with a different infrastructure of people, maybe more women driven, and we're going to run the men's team with the infrastructure that's been so successful for us. I think that's beginning to happen in England, by the way.
Hmm. For example, in England, we have a Lewis FC, for example. It's not a women's only club, but it's a women's driven club, I would say. That's you have that the women's team is driving that club, I would say, more than on the men's
exactly.
side.
And Victoire is a perfect example. Victoire in Como FC Women, it's just a women's team, and they focus all their energy and their wisdom and their market knowledge, and they've done a great job of branding that club.
Definitely. And Victoire has been on the show, now the co-founder and co-CEO of Mercury 13. Also your niece, I think. Is that correct?
She's also my niece. Incredibly proud of her. She's just an amazing woman who's doing incredible things. And I think her model for, how to build an IP around women's football is absolutely 100% dead on. That's the way to go.
Yeah. No, I followed Como Women, a lot since they acquired them, and to see everything that they're doing around as you said, their IP and with the merch side and also with the players. Now Elisha Lehmann has joined the team, which obviously has a lot of star power in the women's football. So a really, really interesting case there.
I think it's a fantastic case, and I'll tell you a little bit of, we did an event with them this summer in Milan, a special edition event. And this is a little bit of where now we're going to be leading with a new product of the Women's Cup. We have something called the Global Series, which is our international event. So we play around the world. But in Milan, we tried something different in cooperation, partnership, or collaboration is the right word, with Mercury 13, which is a new product that we are now going to be calling Fashion and Football. And we're going to be doing these new events, these fashion and football events around the world, where we merge culture, lifestyle, and other elements into the actual event, and do something that's more entertainment driven. And so we like that concept that we started with Victoire, and we're now going to run with that idea. And we have several countries now that we're targeting for that new event.
So much happening now on the women's football side. It makes me happy. We talked about it just before we hit record here with, everything that you're doing, but we have the Athens Women's Football Summit every year that comes together. And now Mercury 13 is just, doing their thing with Como and everything else that they are doing. So do you also feel this positivism and opportunity around women's football?
Well, I think women's football is the place to be if you're investing in sports today. And, we engage with a lot of people in this discussion, venture capital, private equity, everybody that is smart about investing understands the value of investing in women's football. It's the highest growth sport in the world today, men or women. It's the one with the most potential. I think, I don't want to make a mistake whether it was Deloitte or Nielsen, but one of the two big companies forecasted that by 2030, it'll be the fourth largest sport in the world, over 800 million active fans. So if you look at where it is today and you project to where it's going, I don't think you're going to get better value for your investment. And I'll give you one incredible piece of data, which is public information. In the United States, in 2020, women's football franchises were worth, just the franchise. I'm not talking about building the stadium and the rest of the costs, just the franchise. The right to own a team was worth $1 million in 2020. That's what Angel City paid, what Racing Louisville paid, what other clubs paid for their franchise. This last week, the NWSL announced they sold a franchise to Atlanta that paid $150 million. So I challenge anybody to tell me a sport or a business other than maybe AI where you can make 150x on your investment in 5 years. So that's where women's football is, where women's football is going. I can throw at you 100 data points. For example, how undervalued it is TV rights wise. In the United States, I don't know if you know this, but the NWSL had a TV contract up until 2022 for $1.5 million a year for the entire season. They renegotiated that contract with major broadcasters, CBS, ABC, ESPN, Amazon, Ion. That contract went from 1.5 million to 60 million in one cycle, so 50x in one cycle. MLS at the same time was renegotiating their contract with Apple, and they got a $250 million a year contract from Apple. So think about this: MLS, $250 million a year, NWSL, $60 million a year, a little bit, but maybe 5 times less, right? Now, here's the key metric on that comparison. The finals of the MLS were watched in the United States by half the amount of people that watched the finals of the NWSL. So women's football audience for the finals were double the MLS. So if you take that statistic, then you have to say that the NWSL has to be getting TV contracts that are double the MLS, right? The NWSL is drawing more audience, yet 5 times less is what they're getting. So why am I mentioning this? Because the next negotiation cycle of a TV contract for the NWSL will probably be north of 200 million, right? It's undervalued right now. And it's undervalued in every major market around the world. It's undervalued in Europe. It's undervalued in Latin America. 33 million people watched in Brazil alone the finals of Copa America between Brazil and Colombia. 5 million people watched a weekend match between Corinthians and Palmeiras women. That's exactly 5 times the audience in the US. The finals of the NWSL were watched by 1 million people. So there are great emerging markets that have tremendous interest in women's football. The viewership is there, but the money's not there yet.
That's really interesting data, because what I feel is the criticism or the why people say that the sponsorships money is less and the broadcast rights are less is because not as many people watch women's football as the men's football. That's always the argument. Of course, they shouldn't be paid the same because they don't generate the same revenue. But you are showing that this is not the case.
It's not the case in most markets. In some markets, it's the case. But in a lot of markets, you will find, and I've been involved many, many years in the TV distribution business. I negotiate all of our contracts. I put together our network or global network of TV rights sales. And I know that in many markets, men who are the decision makers in the purchasing of rights will look at statistics and deny them. And they'll look at numbers and they'll say, there's no market here. But I'll tell you what, this is a conversation I have permanently. Women are 75% the decision makers for purchasing in the home. 75% of all the purchases that are done in a home are decided by women. And you're having great women audiences on TV. They engage 3x on social media. And then when it comes time to value rights of women's audiences, you're saying nobody's watching? That's not true. They're watching and they're spending, but there is a unfortunate sort of period of time where awareness needs to meet reality that women's football is good business.
Yeah. So you're obviously, you're a businessman, and we talked about here now with if the women's now they generate more viewership than on the men's side in US, yet they are making 1/5 or something like that from the revenues. Should it be leveled like that? That if the women are attracting double the viewership, they should get double? Because that's then when we talk in Europe, for example, we mentioned some of the teams attract maybe 300-400 to the stadiums by the men's fill it. Should it be fair like that? Or should you overinvest on the women's side anyway because you see it as a great opportunity?
So I think there's the problem. You just said something that was, I think, the key to the problem is what we are permanently trying to resolve, not only us at the Women's Cup, but also clubs around Europe and the rest of the world. The audience that goes to the stadium is not the same as the audience that watched on TV. Audiences on TV in Europe are pretty decent with regards to broadcast, metrics, but it's not translated with people going to the stadium. And that, I think, needs to be resolved with a more entertaining stadium game day experience. So that's one issue. But the TV is another issue. Since DAZN picked up women's football in Europe, they invested in more cameras in the stadium, better production. And now I think Disney Plus has bought those rights for the Women's Champions League, and they're going to continue to show the event. And then you build the storytelling, right, around the players, which is where it's at today with the social media world we live in. If you package that product properly, you're going to see some very good audience numbers on TV. And that is where you're going to be able to say, okay, you know what? Hey, maybe I only put 500 people in the stadium and the seats, but I have hundreds of thousands watching on TV and engaging in social media. So that is valuable. I think that's where it's going in Europe. Before it catches up to stadium attendance, you're going to see women's football drive very good TV audience numbers, and they need to go out and they need to fight for that to be valued properly.
Sometimes what's discussed also when we talked about like women's football and men's football is that the fan base might be very different, and it's often described as the fans of women's football maybe are more diverse, more family oriented, while that might be different on the men's side. So then you need to change that approach maybe to your marketing, venue operations, your fan engagement, sponsor activation, and all of that.
Totally. That is the thought process that needs to happen. And I'll tell you something that we've been looking at this data over the last few months that I think has changed our company with regards to how we want to move forward and package our product and how we understand who the audience is. Back just a couple of years ago, the audience breakdown of women's football, whether it be on TV or at the stadium, was 60% men, 40% women. Okay, so men were still the driving the audience for the sport. Today, that number is evened out. So in most markets, it's 50-50. But the projection is that by 2030, it'll be 70-30 on the women's side. Women will be exclusively or mostly driving engagement, audience consumption, attendance, etc. So if you want to be able to have a product that is successful, you're going to have to understand that you're going to be talking mostly to a women-driven audience, a family-driven audience, LGBTQ community-driven audience, but it's not going to be talking to the men, right? You're going to be talking to other people. And if you understand that quickly and you pivot and you generate entertainment and products that are driven towards that audience, you'll be better off.
Yeah. So looking ahead to the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil, how do you think that will change the interest for women's football?
I think it's going to be a game changer in the region. We are already investing very hard in the region because of that. We did an event in Colombia last year. We did an event in Brazil this year. We're rolling out Argentina and Chile next year, most likely Peru as well. We want to have a strong footprint in Latin America. First movers there. I think it's the next great market for women's football. Like I said to you, audience metrics in Colombia and in Brazil are just fantastic. Millions watching games in those two countries. It's only going to increment when the World Cup comes to town. You saw it in Australia. There was a before and after. And I think it's going to be a before and after in Latin America. Once the World Cup happens in Brazil, women's football is just going to take off like crazy.
Do you think that the men's World Cup, now since that will be in the US, Mexico, Canada as well, could influence the interest for women's football?
I think the men's World Cup is like a black hole. You know how the black holes, they attract, they suck in everything that's around them, right? They attract all the attention, right? So I think all the attention of the world's football community will go for a month into the men's World Cup. And I mean, that could benefit some of the women's game, but I think what's really going to benefit the women's game is the women's World Cup. That's going to be the real game changer for women's football, because Latin America has been traditionally, as you know, a breeding ground for football. And, there's great talent from Latin America on the men's side playing in all the top leagues around the world. Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, Ecuador, Peru. They're exporting men's players to the world for decades now. I think what you're going to start seeing now is you're going to have the same effect in women's football. You're going to have really, really good players coming out of Latin America, playing in every major club around the world. And that's also going to generate interest back at home, right? To have these heroes that are conquering the world being from your country. What could an Argentine Messi style women player do for the growth of women's football in Argentina, right? What if you have a woman Messi that plays in Barcelona or Real Madrid, and then every young girl in Argentina looks up to her and decides this is what they want to do or support. So I think that's going to be huge for the growth of women's football in Latin America. Have these stars, these upcoming stars that will be conquering leagues around the world. It'll fuel the growth internally.
I think so too. I think Marta has been that now for like when she was playing in Sweden for a couple of years as well. But as you said, with these new stars coming up, so the girls can have idols to look up to.
100%. And Marta is a great example. She's a huge idol in Brazil. I mean, we took the Women's Cup to Brazil, to Sao Paulo, and we had, Sao Paulo and Palmeiras play in the tournament. We brought Racing Louisville and Pachuca from Mexico to compete against them. And we hired, as a brand ambassador for the Women's Cup, we hired Formiga, who was the sort of the star before Marta really became the huge star. And Formiga, 7 World Cups, right? Like record on men's or women's side, 7 World Cups, 7 Olympics, obviously played with Marta and many of those World Cup teams. But she's huge in Brazil, but she's nothing like Marta. Marta is a superstar in Brazil. And Marta can fill a stadium by herself in Brazil. So I think more Martas are needed that are successful around the world for those countries to get behind their hero, right? And generate local awareness.
Definitely. I'm interested in your journey from before. Like now you're going all in on the women's football side, but you have done a lot of other things before you were in women's football. So how did you get into the sports industry, and how has your journey been like?
So my journey before women's football was men's football, but to get to men's football, I had a very interesting journey where, I always say in life, one thing leads to another. And whenever you think you're doing something that, might not take you to a different direction, then you have to think again and be open. Because like you said, I was very much involved for many years in the ski industry, running ski resorts in Latin America, which got me involved very heavily in the entertainment industry, because obviously ski resorts are event production companies to a certain extent, because you're running competitions all the time. So we had all the World Cups and snowboard and skiing and other activities, and that got me to understand the event business, which then I applied in the football world. So the ski industry taught me that, and then when I got out of the ski industry, I stepped into the publishing industry. And this is a long story that I'll try to make short, but I was living in Patagonia at the time, and I enjoyed very much a sport called fly fishing, which is done there. And so when I got out of the ski industry, I had some time to think what the next move would be. And as it turns out, I decided I want to be the first human being to fish all the lake, rivers, and streams of Patagonia, both Argentina and Chile, something I've never been done. So I set out on this journey, and I wrote a book about it. And then that book became a bestseller. And then next thing I knew, I was running a publishing company, and I was traveling the world writing books about fly fishing. And that publishing company got to be very, very big. And then one day, Boca Juniors, the major club in Argentina, the president of the club called the publishing company, and they wanted us to do the 100-year anniversary book for Boca Juniors. And they told me that they were the biggest club in the world, and that they wanted to have the best book ever done about a professional club. So we took on this project, which was fantastic. And for 2 years, we went and interviewed every single family that had a player playing Boca Juniors since 1906, and got this great footage and stories. And we printed this amazing 300-page coffee table book. And the whole process of doing the Boca Juniors book, I became very good friends with the leadership of Boca Juniors. And then one day I suggested to them that they should expand their brand to the United States, and that I would organize a tour. And that's how the football journey got started. I brought Boca Juniors to the U.S. to do a tour, played 2 games in Florida. The next thing I knew, I had River Plate and Racing and San Lorenzo calling me, and then every major club in Latin America wanted to come to the U.S., and that's how the football company got started. But so if you look at the whole project, I never really meant to go from skiing to publishing, nor to football, but it led me to this moment. And I think of the whole process of having been involved in these industries, I'm very, like I said, very optimistic about the potential of women's football. So when we got involved with women's football, we really stopped doing most of our men's football events and focused all our energy here. This is where we feel it's worth putting your money and your time into.
Well, that's an amazing story. And I love that, because a lot of people ask me, like, what's the best way to get started into the industry? Do you have to study sports management? What do you need to do? I will speak in 2 days to a university in Texas and share some of the stories of the guests I've had on. So, going from what you said, like from skiing to fly fishing to publishing to men's football to women's football, like all roads are different, but all of them can lead to the sports industry.
Absolutely. If you have passion about what you do, and you're willing to work relentlessly towards an objective, knowing you're going to fall 100 times along the way. My first football matches on the men's side were disastrous economically. We lost a ton of money until we figured out how to do it right. Most people quit, at the first setback. I think it's all about perseverance. You have an objective, you know where you're going, and you see it through. Same thing with women's football. We started early. We invested a lot of money. We're just now turning a profit, but we stuck through it and we stuck with it so that we could see the outcome. I think that's the lesson I would teach, or I would say to anybody who's starting in sports or in any endeavor. You're going to fall, you're going to fail, but if you have a vision or you have a drive that you see something that's going to work out, you got to stick with it.
I love that. If there is one thing you want the listeners to remember about women's football, or to take with them after this chat, what would that be?
I think, look, for one thing, I'm a man promoting women's football, right? So let's break down the barriers, right? People that get involved in any particular sport or segment, they have to do it because they believe in the sport, they believe in the business, or they believe in something that's associated with what they're doing. So I would say, whether you're a man or a woman today involved in sports, and you're looking at women's football as a potential career or a potential investment, I think you're at a time where the whole world, as they say, the world is your oyster, that the whole world is really there for the taking. It's so exciting to be involved in a movement or a sport that has so much growth ahead of it. And anything that you can do will have real meaning. Women's football is really just taking off now. I mean, it's, the story that everybody always tells, it actually, back in the early 1900s, it was huge in England and it was banned, right? I mean, everybody knows that story, or if they don't know that story, I'll tell it quickly. Women's football was banned for 50 years, from 1920 to 1970. And then it was banned again for another 20 years, from 1970 to 1990 at the international level. So the question is, what would have happened if women's football hadn't been banned for 70 years in Europe? Maybe today women's football will be as big as men's football. Most likely, probably would be, right? So it's a proven sport. It's not something that, maybe women will know how to play. Maybe women will enjoy watching. Maybe, this will be a good product. No, the answer is, look, go back to 1914. There was 40,000 people watching women's football in England. When the men went to war, women stayed behind. They developed the leagues, and they were playing women's football in front of thousands, tens of thousands. When the men came back from war, they were pissed off about women taking their sport, and they banned it, But the truth is that the sport has all the potential, proven potential, and it'll come back. It'll be a huge sport. And I'll leave you with this sort of last piece of data that I think is very interesting to understand where women's football can go. Today, the ecosystem of men's football captures about 96% of all the revenues generated by football worldwide. Women's football accounts for only 4% of the ecosystem. 50% of the world are women. So just do the math. It can only go up.
Yeah, I love that. So much have happened in the last few years only in the women's side. And as you said, there is a lot of potential. So I can't wait to see what the future holds for women's football.
We're going to be hopefully connecting at least once a year and exchanging information and looking at those metrics. And I think hopefully in the next 4 years, everything that I mentioned today will come to fruition, which is appreciation of women's TV rights, appreciation of women's sponsorship value, and larger audiences in stadiums in secondary markets such as Europe and Latin America, where it's just now beginning to pick up steam. I think it's just only going to continue to grow.
If the listeners want to learn more about the Women's Cup or watch the games, where can they go to read more?
They can go on the womenscup.world website. The womenscup.tv is our OTT platform where all our matches reside, and our library resides if you want to watch previous tournaments. And obviously our social platforms on Instagram.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much for taking the time to join Sports Management Podcast.
It's been amazing talking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com, connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow the podcast on Instagram, X, and Facebook @SportsMPodcast.